Welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And at the time this one goes up, it's probably hitting Disney Plus, but most likely you saw it in the theater because it's just like the big box office success of the year. We are talking about Inside Out 2. Joining me to talk about it, we've got Jon Lefkovitz coming to the show. First time on the podcast. Happy to have him here. We get into a great conversation. Lots of great puzzle pieces to get into for this one. And before we get to it, though, I do want to remind you, as always, to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever you're listening to the podcast right now. You could also follow us on social media at PiecingPod. And don't forget to join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about here on the podcast. So with that said, let's get into this conversation about Inside Out 2. All right, it's time to get into Inside Out 2, and I've got Jon Lefkovitz with me right now to talk about it. How's it going, Jon?
It's going great. Thanks for having me, David.
Yeah, absolutely. This is God, I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but this is the big movie of the year, it turned out to be, even though there was a little bit of a question mark whether or not that would happen when we first, decided to end up covering this when it came out. So it's kind of exciting. I'm excited to get into it and get into some puzzle pieces for this thing. But it is your first time on the show, though. So tell my listeners a little about you and what you do.
Okay. I am. Boy, I hate using the phrase multi-hyphenate. I don't want to seem haughty or anything. I do wear a few different hats. I'm a filmmaker. I'm an editor by trade. Do a lot of commercial stuff, corporate stuff for hire, but also my own independent films. And then I also compose music and have composed the scores for my own films and some unproduced films. It's like those are my two main loves, cinema and music.
Yeah, a lot of us that are creative types end up getting those hyphenates involved at some point or another. I mean, I myself, composer,
Of course.
dash podcast producer, dash host, dash whole bunch of other stuff. But we can't help ourselves, right?
Right, especially in this day and age.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, going into Inside Out 2, I mean, you had kind of suggested this one like a month ago or something like that. It's funny. I've covered plenty of Pixar and other, animated fare on this show before, but a lot of the times when they're coming up, it's just kind of like they're just always there. There's always like whatever the animated movie of the month is, and I never really think to cover them. And sometimes a guest will be like, hey, but what about that one? And I'm like, oh, yeah, let's do it. I'm really glad we ended up covering it, though, because this is a really fun series. And, the first one is, it deals with so much, so many things that everybody goes through, but at the same time kind of gets into all that, crazy wackiness that these kinds of movies do tend to get into also. And so I'm glad that I ended up going to see this thing and to get to talk to you about it. Were you a big fan of the first one?
I adore the first one. It's
Nice.
on I have a list of the top 150 films ever made. It was originally top 100, and then that became too small a number, so it expanded over the years. But yeah, it's like probably my second favorite Pixar,
Nice.
after Ratatouille, of course.
Yeah,
Uh,
sure.
and and it's just one of my favorite Disney films. Period. I'm a big Disney guy. I love. Actually, my favorite genre is just family films because it's just so impressive to me when you make a movie that can appeal to a 3-year-old and an 83-year-old at the same
Mm,
time.
yeah.
And I feel like Inside Out is that. I mean, primarily because of how, like you alluded to, it's so deep, so
Yeah.
profound. It's everyone can relate to these things. It's so primal about these emotions, literally about emotions, and art is about emotion. Art is emotional. It's so many people say it's less about thinking and more about feeling, and
hmm
so like I think to make art that's about emotion that was just a brilliant stroke that Pixar, Pete Docter, all those people back in almost 10 years ago uh, had. And then I'm really glad that they made a sequel and that the sequel is good.
Yeah, yeah, that's always dangerous, especially with something as high concept as Inside Out. That it's all going to kind of fall apart if they try to mess with the formula, add the new characters, add all the new stuff, and yeah, no, it absolutely worked. And I think also, like, before we get into our first puzzle piece, and maybe this will even come up as we're going into puzzle pieces, but adding the main new emotion that's basically anxiety is certainly something that is going to appeal more to the higher end of that age range of literally all ages. But
Yeah.
it's definitely something that people our age and up from there can all probably relate to more so than the kids that are in the audience. But then there's everything that is there for the kids, and they're all going to be going through it at some point.
Oh yeah, of course. Anxiety is something that is especially, all too common today, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see it in a lot of movies, which I think will also factor into some puzzle pieces here. But what do you got for your first piece?
Okay, so clearly, Inside Out is the main antecedent, the film uh, that this movie could not exist without.
Hmm.
But I also think that the film Eighth Grade,
Mm.
written and directed by Bo Burnham, the great Bo Burnham. I think he's a really talented guy.
Oh, yeah.
Um, 2018, and it stars Elsie Fisher as this teenage, or I think middle schooler, 13, 14, uh, who is going through the confusion of adolescence.
Hmm.
And uh, when I was looking at Riley and all of the things that were happening to her throughout Inside Out 2, I thought this this is very similar to Eighth Grade. I don't know if they saw it. I don't know if the writers and uh, Kelsey Mann, the director, were inspired by it, but it certainly is uh, is very much in almost every frame of this film.
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree. And I think they would have to, because I think dealing with the the anxieties of a Gen Z kid, how could you not look at something like Eighth Grade, which just captures that perfectly? And by the way, I mean, since then from Bo Burnham, we've had, Inside, which was, so
Sure.
amazing. Where is Bo Burnham? Where is he? Why hasn't he made something since then?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, Inside was 3 years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
And before that, he famously took this hiatus from stand-up comedy,
Yeah.
which I believe was 5 years. And so, like that, Inside was his big comeback in a way. And that movie itself is very much about. I would say it's less about anxiety and more about depression.
Sure.
Um, and especially just being informed by the COVID era and being stuck in a room
Yeah.
or stuck in a house. And yeah, so I think he is very tuned in to mental health
Yes.
um, and yeah, I mean, seeing all the different challenges that Elsie Fisher's character goes through, and obviously it's an R-rated film, so they're able to go much more into sex and that part of puberty and the really um, sort of uh, disturbing parts of it. And
Yeah.
of course, this is PG. It's not G. They were able to get a little bit in there,
Yeah.
but it's mostly about just fitting in and just trying to make being able to be a social uh, to make it socially. Um, and so yeah, I mean, it's the awkwardness and and the the confusion, as I said earlier, just that those things are were handled so well in this film and in Eighth Grade.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know what? I was going to save this one for later, but it just fits so well with eighth grade because eighth grade was actually a puzzle piece when we covered this movie back in 2022. But I'm going to bring up Turning Red for my first puzzle
Ah,
piece, another Pixar movie.
yep.
I feel like Inside Out 2 is almost as much a sequel to Inside Out as it is a companion piece to Turning Red, with dealing with those changes of that particular age range and everything that comes with puberty and the stresses of those changes in life. And I think that of the last few years, obviously Pixar, partially because of everything that happened with the pandemic, but and everything with Disney Plus and all that stuff, really they kind of needed a hit this year with Inside Out 2.
Yes. Yes.
And I think of the ones that kind of got a little bit buried, I thought Turning Red was the best one of the bunch. I think it's a great movie, and I think the main characters, like friend group, are all really fun, and all of the obviously stuff dealing with her period and all that stuff just makes for a lot of really poignant stuff, but also a lot of really funny stuff. And it's just a great movie. And along with eighth grade and now Inside Out 2, I think really kind of makes a really great text for people that are, at that age range.
Oh yeah, for sure. Turning Red was going to be one of mine. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, I remember the controversy when it came out, and people being very, a lot of parents being like, "It's an animated film about what?"
Yeah.
And a lot of people being scared away because of it's a Disney film that deals with a girl getting her period. I mean, the
Yeah.
title itself is a reference to that. And as you said, it's not. It really was. It was kind of buried, and it wasn't a big hit. But I I just remember watching it and thinking, I can't believe they're doing this. I can't believe they're getting away with, or they're
Yeah.
trying to get away with this.
Yeah.
Obviously, it wasn't that big a hit comparatively, but yeah, there's no Inside Out 2 without Turning Red, and I think that they, when they were making Inside Out 2, they were probably like, all right, let's look at what we did right in terms of the commercial appeal, and what we need to stay away from. And I think that's partially why they have the p word, the puberty, in a button that's literally flashing at the beginning of the film,
Sure.
but there's no the other p word, period, is
Yeah.
nowhere in sight.
They learned from their mistakes.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's the sarcasm right there. But
Oh yeah.
let's go on to another puzzle piece. What do you got next?
Boyhood.
Oh, sure.
So Richard Linklater's Boyhood, which I wouldn't say we all know because it's not like it made $500 million, but it was definitely like a major art house hit, and an award winner and all that. And it's a film that was made over 12 years, following this boy from 7 or 8 all the way up through his late teen years when he's a freshman in college. And so, obviously, the era or the period that sticks in my mind while watching Inside Out 2 is kind of the middle of the film, kind of early middle, when he's starting to uh, starting to get into that kind of awkward phase, and he's hanging out with some older kids, and uh, they're just not good influences on him.
Sure.
Do you remember this scene where one of them has like a board, like a wooden board that he gives to one of the kids he lifts up, and everyone in the audience thinks that another one of the other kids is just going to chop through it and hit him and seriously injure him. And it's a great Linklaterian move to subvert the audience's expectation there, and have it just be, oh, the wood breaks, this boy is fine, and
That's
and
great.
and so like that kind of like that, those small intimate moments, where you think something's going to escalate into something bigger, but it just remains kind of the older kids are not, they're not appealing, but they're also not, you know uh, like the worst, most dangerous bullies either. And
Sure.
so in Inside Out 2, Riley, meeting these girls, and several of them are quite friendly to her, and then
Hmm.
others are she overhears them speaking, kind of negatively about her, and how she's trying so hard, and just, she's having such a hard time connecting with these older kids. And I remember myself just, always having a tough time just like trying to impress older kids. I think that's something that a lot of most of us dealt with in
I
middle
think
school
so.
and early high school. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. Especially the music questions, which I mean that's just an impossible question to even answer, really.
yes, yeah, I really felt for her in that scene.
Yeah, but Boyhood is a really damn. I need to rewatch that. I haven't seen it since it came out, and such a good movie. And I'm wondering if like a Pixar style, like directly inspired by Boyhood movie could work. Going through
Mm.
that many like stages of life in one movie rather than a series. If something that moves that quickly through so much of someone's life, if that could work in an animated form.
Yeah, I don't know. I think inevitably people would say this is the Pixar's attempt at Boyhood.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's hard though with animation because
Yeah.
it's just so it's just like it's like almost a different form. At the mean or the ends are the same. In the end of the day, it's a movie with characters, story, theme, and style, but the means are completely different from live action.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'm going to go to one that is a little bit of a cheat because the director actually mentioned it before this movie came out. You kicked this off with an A24 film with Eighth Grade. I am going to go with Uncut Gems for a
Oh,
puzzle piece here.
interesting.
Um, I mean, anxiety seems to be in the air in a lot of movies lately, whether it's something like Uncut Gems dealing with this gambling addict and just this nonstop anxious kind of filmmaking where it just never kind of lets up for the main character and the action just keeps going and keeps going. Or something here where it's dealing with specifically a person's anxiety. It's like kind of two different angles of that. We hear the term anxiety inducing a lot lately.
Hmm.
Bo is afraid, Shiva baby. Like it's kind of something we're seeing a lot lately. But Uncut Gems, I feel like, is the biggest one of them of the bunch. And the Safdie brothers are just kind of they're perfect when it comes to that kind of stuff. They really know how to make that tension heighten and then not allow it to let up all the way through to the end. And while obviously very different movies from Inside Out 2, I think just the conversation around anxiety within a lot of movies and a lot of different styles and genres make it kind of a perfect fit for a series of movies that deals with different emotions that people feel. So it just made so much sense to fit that moment in film right now into the sequel to Inside Out.
Yeah. Admittedly, I am not the biggest fan of
Hmm.
that film. Um, Having said that, I remember, myself definitely feeling incredibly anxious
Yeah.
watching it. I
Yeah.
mean, it begins with a colonoscopy, uh,
Hmm.
and uh, and
And we don't get the results right away either. We got to wait for those.
and I mean, obviously, as a Jew,
Hmm.
that I have always felt like that's kind of something that's a little bit more common among our people,
Sure.
necessarily, and that movie is very much about that. But yeah, with Inside Out 2, um, I was I was struck by how frenetic it was,
Hmm.
and the first one is much cleaner, I would say. There are fewer emotions. It's a simpler time in life that it's covering, and the alternate brain universe. Even though it can be quite complex with all the different memories and the dream studios and Bing Bong and all that, it's still um, pretty streamlined. Inside Out 2, on the other hand, is like I would almost say it's a bit of a mess, and
Yeah.
in the best way. You know,
Mhm.
it's because it's about a messy time in life, so
Sure.
it's brilliant. That they mirror the theme with the approach. Making it incredibly fast paced and and lots of stuff going on and obviously lots more emotions. Um, but also, yeah, just being about that time in life that's very much that way, if
Yeah.
that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense, and I think you're absolutely right that it mirrors that moment in life, so it makes sense to do it that way, even if, narratively, like, it might be a little easier to follow the first one, and, that'll come up in another one of my puzzle pieces later, but, let's go to your next piece.
Okay, so I couldn't help but think of Back to the Future Part Two.
Ooh, okay.
Are you how familiar are you with this film?
I mean, I loved it growing up, but I
Yes.
haven't seen it in many, many years.
Okay, so that film I adore. The first one I think is one of the best movies ever, and I actually am a big defender of the third as well. But
Mhm.
there is a scene in part two, or it's almost more of a sequence, where Marty is trying to break into the principal's office to retrieve the almanac, and
Mm.
oh my god, I'm blanking on the principal's name, but it's not Skinner because that's Simpsons.
That's The
Uh,
Simpsons, yeah.
but the principal comes in, and it's incredibly suspenseful. And Marty is hiding under the desk, and principal's drinking coffee, and he pushes his chair back, and it smashes Marty's hand, and Marty's like biting onto his hat, trying not to scream.
Mm.
Anyway, you will probably guess the scene in Inside Out 2. That scene, I was like, this is the same exact scene. She's trying to break into the uh, it's not the principal, but the coach's office
Sure.
to retrieve the Holy Grail, the notebook that has the um, her opinions about
Yeah.
all of the different uh, girls, the hockey players. And so they I was waiting for the coach to come in. They didn't go that far. They didn't make it, a play by play remake of that scene. And I don't even know if it was subconscious or conscious. But yeah, that's just that kind of comedic, but also incredibly suspenseful um,
Sure.
moment where with Marty, it's like he's got to get that almanac because it's the space time continuum uh,
Oh, yeah.
is in the balance. But Riley, you're rooting against her. You're saying, you do not want her to do the wrong thing. And,
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil what happens, but let's just say it's not the best decision.
Absolutely, yeah, and we can get into spoilers here, but,
Okay.
yeah, but no, totally, that's a good one, and, I actually hadn't thought about this one until just now, but I'm just gonna jump right on top of that because, speaking of that book and having to get the book, I hadn't even thought of this, but Mean Girls,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
I think, fits with the Burn book and all that, and, and of course, the old friends versus the new friends, and who's she gonna ultimately go with, and who's she gonna stay friends with, and so I think you could definitely see some Mean Girls in there as well, and that kind of pairs well with your Back to the Future Part Two piece.
Yeah, Mean Girls. I always thought that it would have been better if they took the eighth grade approach, where like Elsie Fisher is, so real, and
Hmm.
the casting of Lindsay Lohan, I always felt was a bit of a cop out.
Hmm.
And it's just it. I just would have felt it to be I would have preferred it to feel a little more real.
I haven't seen the musical remake, but I hear it's even more heightened to the point where it's
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, my wife watched it and she loved it. She
okay,
likes the original too, but, yeah, she said it was quite underrated. I mean, it just
okay.
came and went, but
All right, so I might actually have to see that Mean Girls musical one of these days before the year's up. But
Yeah.
I will, since that was just kind of like a throwaway extra piece in there, I will actually go with Wreck-It Ralph for a piece here.
Mm.
I was thinking about anxiety and how, and again, we're getting into spoilers here, but anxiety being essentially the villain of the story in Inside Out 2, and eventually needs to kind of team up with, who are, ostensibly the good guys to save the day and to actually like save the day from the bigger threat that's been like brought about by his kind of wrongdoing. And so I think it kind of takes a similar structure to bad guy turned kind of good guy by the end of the movie.
Have you seen Ralph Breaks the Internet?
I back when it came out, I'm sure I watched it. I must have.
Okay. Yeah, that's the sequel. It's not as good as the original.
Hmm.
But man, just in terms of the frenetic pacing and like this Sarah Silverman character, the girl in, the Candyland video game,
Yeah,
like so hyped up. Of
that's
course, it's
right.
it's a sugar rush. It's and sugar fueled energy, but that just that is definitely felt in Inside Out too as well.
Right
Um,
on. Yeah, throw
yeah,
them both on the list.
but yeah, that alternate world, outside the video games, you know, there's very little, especially in the second one, uh, but in the vast majority of the film takes place inside these video games
Hmm.
worlds. Whereas I love how in Inside Out and Inside Out 2, it's like almost 50-50, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
between the real world and the brain.
Yeah, they even though the second one there's certainly like more going on, like it still has a good balance overall. So,
Yes.
yeah. Well, what do you got for your next piece?
Well, so this is my final one.
Hmm.
I and it's another Pixar film. The uh, m- Probably the most underrated title from Pixar's last maybe 7 or 8 films, and it is 2020's Soul.
Oh, I
Um,
love Soul. Yeah.
Soul, I thought was just so overlooked, and like Ratatouille, very much a film that's about passion and art and creativity. And so, to have this talented musician, trying to make it to this jazz audition or yeah, jazz audition for a jazz um, band, and have sinking down the sewer,
Mm,
dying, and then we have his whole um, soul universe basically personified. When I saw that, I was like, "This is Inside Out for the soul."
yeah.
They're just taking it one step further. We're making it even more abstract. Uh,
Sure.
Inside Out, like these are concrete emotions that we all have. Soul, uh, it's very hard to explain to a 5-year-old what the soul is.
Sure.
And I think that might be one of the reasons why it wasn't a bigger hit. Um, but man, the alternating between um, him basically in his afterlife or trying to be, I guess it's more of a limbo.
Sure.
His trying to still make it to the audition um, and then let showing us what this very bizarre and beautiful in a way, and fascinating soul universe is like. That was just a really um, cool approach.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that movie, and I love the score. Trent Reznor and John
Yeah.
Batiste,
Oh,
so good. So good. But yeah, both using using that kind of like multiple worlds, interacting with one another approach for its storytelling, which it just opens up the door for so much interesting, weird stuff going on, which
yeah.
certainly makes it really fun. Um, I have two more things I want to bring up. The first one, not a movie, but just in general, I was thinking about role playing games, and not just because the heartthrob character looks like a Final Fantasy character,
Mm.
um, but also because we were talking about how much more complicated Inside Out 2 is than Inside Out 1. There's just a lot of stuff to keep track of.
Oh,
The rules of how the emotions work, how they get rid of the bad thoughts, how memories are stored, all these different things. It just reminded me of the inventory management and like just like all the stuff you have to go through to successfully play a role playing game. It feels like Pixar and the director Kelsey Mann were like, if they could play these games, they could probably keep track of all this stuff.
yeah. I mean, I'm not a gamer. I played games before, but I totally know what you're saying. But certainly the idea that they're throwing a lot at you, the beliefs, Riley's beliefs, and then
Sure.
when they go into the dungeon, and that's I think where they meet that Final Fantasy character,
Yeah.
um, and as well as Pouchy, and it's 2D animation versus
Yeah.
in
Which
the
was a
midst.
very South Park bit, by the way. That was good.
Yes, very
Yeah.
South Park. Um, but I thought that was great. I was like, man, they're really going balls to the wall here. Like, uh, I'll take it. Um,
Yeah.
and and yeah, it's just part of the messiness again. The
Yeah.
the mirroring that anxiety, the freneticness, and the messiness of that period of everyone's lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Ooh.
Absolutely. And then the last thing I wanted to bring up, too new to really be a puzzle piece, but this, speaks to the whole kind of snake eating its tail of movies influencing each other. But I was thinking of earlier this year, Orion in the Dark, the
Oh yeah.
Charlie Kaufman co-penned DreamWorks animation movie about a kid who, along with his fear that's personified, has to go on this adventure. And, we get into more adventures with the emotions basically, and of course with fear being the main one and anxiety kind of being a cousin of fear in a way.
Yeah.
They certainly go together pretty hand in hand and make for an interesting year for these movies that definitely speak to adults but certainly speak to kids who are going through this changing period in their life.
For sure. I loved Orion in the Dark. I saw it twice, and I was my first reaction was, "This is Inside Out for sleep."
Sure.
For having the dreams and the light and all these different things being personified, and especially the dark. And I thought that was brilliant, and I was like, this it's a whole genre, it's or a subgenre, with
Yeah.
Soul and with Inside Out and with this, and with Orion. Yeah, the personification of normally abstract things.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I'll read down our list of puzzle pieces here, and then we'll get into some closing thoughts. But we talked about Eighth Grade, Turning Red, Boyhood, Uncut Gems, Back to the Future Part 2, Mean Girls, Wreck It Ralph and Ralph Breaks the Internet, Soul, role playing games, squeeze South Park in there as well, and then Orion and the Dark. I think we got into a lot of really, really fun stuff, really interesting stuff here. Um, yeah, do you have any closing thoughts? Anything that we didn't quite get to talk about while going through puzzle pieces?
No, just that I'm really happy that Pixar is still making good films. I mean, I was not a fan of Cars, and that's like 20 years
Mm,
ago almost. But for a long time they were just like the Michael Jordan of movie studios,
sure.
and then post Inside Out, it was just kind of this up and downness. And I think people should not generalize too much about the last 10 years because of the films that we discussed, Turning Red and Soul.
Sure.
Even though Luca is not, it's okay, and I thought Lightyear was very disappointing.
Yeah, that
Toy
was
Story,
that was definitely the worst of the bunch for
but
sure.
Toy Story 4 was pretty good, and
I
so
like Toy Story 4 a lot, and I
yeah.
think that they are making a 5, right? I think I read
Oh,
that.
I'm not sure.
I don't know. I think that that's what I read was like one of their next things, but But yeah, and I mean, of course, Elemental was the other one in this time frame, and
Yeah.
that ended up doing well overall, you know. But yeah, a lot of these movies, like we talked about, are really good. They just didn't really get a chance. So it's good to see that this one is you know, being much more of a success story, and maybe we'll rewrite the narrative. Although hopefully the message isn't just sequels.
Yeah, right. Although, talk about, rewriting the narrative of sequels not being, not having to be terrible, you know?
Yeah.
It's the whole Godfather 2, Empire Strikes Back, and then like everything else is terrible. But like, no, Pixar knows how to make good sequels, all the way back to Toy Story 2 and 3.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up Inside Out 2. John, is there another movie you watched recently you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Okay, so can I? This is just totally random.
Sure.
Um, but last night I revisited one of my favorite documentaries about movie making.
Okay.
A wonderful subgenre of documentaries. The film Pretty as a Picture: The Art of David Lynch.
Okay.
I'm a big David Lynch guy, and there was a much more acclaimed documentary about him a few years ago called David Lynch: The Art Life, which is on the Criterion Collection. That's also terrific, but Pretty as a Picture, it's on the supplements for the Lost Highway Blu-ray or DVD. And
Okay.
so I would recommend to everybody anyone who's a Lynch fan to check it out. It is just so entertaining. It's full of wonderful moments. Is it the best, you know, most well edited documentary? Probably not, but it's just full of just wonderful gems.
Hmm. Right on. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I will definitely have to check that one out. And uh, you know, not to show off my transition skills here or anything, but you made a documentary about a filmmaker, right?
Yes, that's true. Um, Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, it's a film called Sight and Sound: The Cinema of Walter Murch. And Walter Murch, he directed one film, but he's mainly known as a wonderful editor and sound
Sure.
designer. Um, and yeah, I mean, probably, I mean, I have seen Pretty as a Picture like 8 or 9 times, and I that going way back, maybe 20 years. So that might have been some kind of subconscious influence on the editing of Sight and
Nice.
Sound. Always, looking for influences for, um, especially when it comes to documentaries about movie making.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, right on. Where can people find you and your work?
So I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I teach film at a local university called Point Park. And I'm online at jonlefkovitz.com. It's not Lefkowitz, it's Lefkovitz with a V.
Right on. Right on. I pronounced it right the first time,
Yes,
didn't I?
thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Hey, there we go. Right on. Well, John, thank you so much for joining me on the show, and hopefully we'll get you back again sometime.
Thank you so much for having me, David. This was a blast.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about Inside Out 2. Thanks to Jon Lefkovitz for joining me on that one, and thank you to all of you for listening. If you're enjoying piecing it together, make sure you're subscribed. Also, maybe drop us a little 5-star rating and review wherever it is that you're listening right now, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Good Pods, Spotify, wherever it is. Maybe drop that 5-star rating. That would be awesome, and make sure that more people get to check out the show. Also, if you thought of any puzzle pieces that we didn't bring up, please send them in. You could do that on social media at Piecing Pod and our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces. Email me on the website, piecingpod.com. You can get my email address. Comment right on the episode on Good Pods. Wherever it is, send in your puzzle pieces. I will read them on the next trailers episode. I always love hearing from people, and that would be awesome if you did that. Aside from all that, I also want to let you know we do have a Patreon, the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I post bonus and advanced content from Piecing It Together, Awesome Movie Year, and from my music career. I think at this time there's still a bunch of advanced episodes of Piecing It Together, just waiting for the right moment to get released on the main feed. And in the meantime, as long as they're done and ready to be listened to, they are on the Patreon. There's also extended versions of episodes, there's video versions of episodes, and all kinds of other great bonus content. So check it out. Again, it's patreon.com/bydavidrosen, and I do appreciate your support. And with that said, let's close this out with a piece of music like I always do. I'm trying to think of something good for, the whole, everything going on in this person's head. And so I was like, why don't I go back to my album Head Like Fire for the title track, Head Like Fire. It's actually called Head on Fire. This album was Head Like Fire. The song is Head on Fire. I don't know why I did that. I think I've seen bands do that before where they have a title track that's not quite exactly the same as the title of the album itself, but it's clearly inspired by its own album title, but just a little different. Anyway, this is that song from the album Head Like Fire. Hope you enjoy it. We'll be back with more Piecing It Together real soon.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.